From Athens to Rome, Thebes to Cairo, Paris to Washington, and Kyoto to Beijing, humans have created unparalleled machines that propel the development of civilizations and defend themselves against the test of time. Cities. What is a city? People use the word to describe the place where a large number of people live and work across the globe. But their perception of a city can vary significantly, as what people in an African rural area consider as a city might just be a small town to their counterparts living in the New York. Today, geographers define the term operationally as a place of gathering with a center, which serves its corresponding functions, including a central business district, both residential and non-residential lands. Intriguingly, the words civilization and cities share the same Latin root civis, and their formation seems to require similar conditions: a habitable environment, specialization of different groups that provides a foundation for economic system, a power system, and social hierarchy, a good location for defense, and most importantly, a surplus in agricultural products. Thus, cities embody more than their physical composition and location, but reveals most, if not all, aspects of the groups residing within them, from daily triviality to their collective consciousness. To cities, we are the creator, yet also the prisoner. Since its birth, a city seems to have developed cognition activities of its own, not only being a construction that serves specific functions, but forming an organic system that intertwines with its residence in geography. It acts as a cultural symbol, social segregation, and a political propaganda. These functions, when combined, will influence how people live in the city, perceive different values and beliefs. In other words, city also creates us. If that is the case, to what extent is our knowledge of the world reflected in the things we create for ourselves, and how do the objects we create, in turn, shape the way we perceive the world? I was born in Beijing, the capital of China. So was my father and my grandfather. Besides living half a year in a small town in southern China, I spent most of the time living inside the city, and I became fascinated by her history, her geography, and her changes throughout the time. When I was a kid, I lived in the Hutu, a traditional residential community in Beijing, and moved out to modern apartment, a gated community as I grew up. My transition from a traditional community to a modern one is actually similar to the drastic changes that took place in the city in the last several decades. In fact, the process of urbanization and modernization of Beijing had begun long before I was born. It started when my father was still a naive lad who helped his peasant family in the field to make livings. It seems unrealistic for Beijing to develop into its current appearance within 30 years, yet it did happen. A drastic change in socio-economic structure, ideology, and cultural practices of China as a result of globalization is reflected with astonishing clarity in its capital city. The juxtaposition and conflicts created by such overwhelming trend is still observable in today's city, revealing the shocks and cognitive dissonance that people underwent during the 30 years of the famous Reform and Open period. The complexity of Beijing demonstrates the ridiculousness and the beauty of post-communist developing cities at the same time. I was born at the very end of Beijing's transitional stage, yet through the stories shared by my father and my grandfather, I was able to glance through the short corridor of time and have a glimpse of how Beijing, this huge political machine, social assembly, and cultural symbol interacts with the people living inside of it throughout the time. Such interactions are reciprocal, and as human beings, you may find it hard to believe. We can be defined by what we make. Currently, Beijing is classified as a second-class world city by the United Nations, having the same international status with other metropolises like Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Bangkok. It ranked the sixth on the most populous cities among the world, second in China, with over 21.2 million of registered citizens. Belongs to the group of cities that are termed megacities. The urban region of Beijing is divided by 8 administrative districts, while having another 8 administrative districts as peripheral suburban town areas. Connecting with each other, these 16 districts form a continuous region over 16,000 square kilometers. As the capital of China, Beijing mainly serves as the political center, cultural center, educational center, an important transportation hub, and also an economic center, although the last two functions are not served exclusively by the city. As one of the big threes in China, Beijing attracts immigrants and people who are seeking for employment all over the country, creating a complex population merged with local people. According to the sixth census conducted by Chinese government, about 0.8 million people in Beijing belongs to the minority ethnic group, constituted around 4% of the population. Among these ethnic groups, Mongolian, Man, Hui, and Korean took up the most percentage, as a result of the unique history of Beijing. After the foundation of People's Republic of China, various renovation projects took place in the city, eliminated several boundaries of the gathering regions of these minority ethnic groups, promoted the merging of the ethnic groups, yet several regions with significant scale of minority gatherings still exist today, adding unique cultural characteristics to the city. If one is asked about the most famous feature of Beijing's spatial arrangement, the distinct central axis line is probably the first answer of the majority. Taking a general view of Beijing from above, you find a nearly symmetrical conformation between the west half and the eastern half. The central axis, as the geographical center of Beijing, embodies nearly all the cultural symbols you may think of around it: the nest, water cube, the bell and drum towers, Beihai Park, the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, Chairman Mao's Memorial, and you name it. It is fair to say that the central axis is the spinal cord of Beijing's traditional culture as well as its contemporary development. The symmetry of the city around it reflects ancient Confucius philosophy of harmony in the structure of society, while the functional sectors near the central axis line reveal us a post-communistic influence in the spatial arrangement of cities, which is frequently seen in many Eastern European cities. In this type of city design, governmental department or related buildings will replace a central business district and occupy the geographical center of a city, a reflection of the control of the government has over the city and its citizens, pervading the ideology of collectivism through the power that architectures have. Similar to Beijing, Washington, D.C. and Paris, two megacities and national capitals, both have a central axis line. The central axis of Washington, D.C. extends from west to east and between the Potomac River and its tributary, including landmarks such as the Capitol Hill and the Senate, Lincoln Memorial at the very west end, Washington Monument, the Pentagon Building, and other political architectures. It mainly reflects the political ideologies of the people of the United States and acts as a political propaganda. On the other hand, the axis of Paris crosses the Arc of Triomphe, the Notre Dame, and the Eiffel Tower, although it also can arouse a sense of pride in one's national identity. It mainly reflects the cultural attractiveness of the city and functions as a center for tourism. Beijing's central axis organically combined the Washington and Paris axis, serving both functions of cultural output and political propaganda. Another distinctive arrangement of Beijing is its residential land, which people live inside basic living gatherings called hutong, each considered as a separate community. As a traditional residential space, hutong creates a unique lifestyle for its residents, and its difference with modern living places such as gated communities reveals the conflicts between traditional and global values. Most famous hutongs that still remain functional today are close to the central axis line, making them also a part of the urban central zone. However, the juxtaposition between hutongs, today's central axis, and central business district reveals social inequality and questions the effect of modernization on people's lives. It might be surprising how the current appearance of the city shapes and transforms people's perception of the world in a significant yet implicit way. It leads me to question that what changes people's perception during the process that also causes the irreversible loss of traditional cultural practices. I found that there exists an astonishing connection between a city and its residents' acquirement of knowledge. In order to understand the social and cultural meaning of the Central Axis and the Hutong, we must examine the natural geography and the history of the formation of Beijing. The first written record of Beijing was from 3,000 years ago, being known as the city of Ji, the capital of Yan, one of the earliest slavery countries in China. It was founded at the only commutable point between the Beijing Small Plain, also known as Beijing Bay Area, and the North China Plain. In addition, among the mountains that surround the three sides of Ji, there are several naturally formed valleys that are commutable and connects to the backside of the city. The natural geography of the city makes it the transportation hub from the middle part of China to Mongolian Plain and the Northeast Plain, which remains unchanged. Since Qin, the first unified empire of China, from Sui and Tang Dynasty, Ji served as the center for trade and transportation between Han culture and the Man culture from the Northeast Plain. Obviously, during wartime, monarchs would establish the city as the basement at the frontier. Today, one can still learn about such etches of time from the early ages of Beijing, as the most famous canal in China starts from Beijing and ends at Hangzhou, was built during Sui Dynasty, utilized the transportation advantage of the city. During Tang Dynasty, the Emperor Taizong ordered the construction of Minzhong Temple, as he garrisoned his troops at the place. This temple, now known as Fayuan Temple, located on Guang'anmen Street, has become the Buddhist Books and Cultural Relics Museum and the Buddhist Academy of China. The first dynasty that established Beijing as its capital was Jin, which is the ancestor of today's Man culture in the northeastern China, as they changed the name of the city into Zhongdu, literally meaning the central capital. The empire began the construction of a group of royal palaces for the first time in the history of Beijing. Unfortunately, it was totally razed into debris as the following dynasty, Yuan, the empire of the Mongolians, was constructing their own palaces. The construction took place during the Yuan dynasty gave the shape of modern Forbidden City, which was later on renovated by Ming and Qing dynasties, finally became the Forbidden City today people who live in and travel to Beijing can see. Besides the royal palaces, constructions that gave the shape of the inner city of Beijing, well, corresponding to the inside of the second ring road today, as well as several public parks that are a favorite of both locals and tourists. Today, the most well-preserved cultural heritages are the remains from these two dynasties, which also enables Beijing to attract tourists from the world as the cultural center of China. Since the formation of the prototype of Beijing's central axis during Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasty, it serves as a political propaganda that pervades the power of the empire and communicates the ideology of autocratic imperialism. It is noteworthy that how the preference for the center as the place with the highest value by Asian Chinese ruler is reflected by the construction of the Forbidden City, one of the landmark architectures along the central axis. It follows a strict symmetrical spatial arrangement divided by the axis, and the three most important palaces, Taihe, Zhonghe, and Baohe, was perfectly aligned along the central axis. In addition, the chair where the empire used to sit on during morning gatherings also locates perfectly on that virtual central line, implying the ultimate power of the ruler himself, being able to manipulate the city while sitting at the center. The ruler is expected to show his authority and dictatorship through the architecture of the city. Similarly, the architecture groups, including the Tiananmen, the Chairman Mao's Memorial Hall, China National Museum, and the Monument of People's Heroes that constitute today's Tiananmen Square, has the similar effect on people's perception towards authority. It serves as a symbol of the collective will of the nation, the representation of the ruling party, and the power they possess. As one stands in front of the Tiananmen Square, especially during the flag-raising ceremonies, having the feeling of awe and pride in one's own national identity is more than just common, but an effect of political propaganda as in the form of architecture. The relative position between the Tiananmen Square and the Forbidden City, which is not forbidden to the public anymore, implies that the old world has already collapsed and the time is rapidly changing as new power has come to the front, both geographically and symbolically. According to Chinese historical geographer Hou Renzhi, the Tiananmen Square is a place where citizens celebrate their great triumph over autocratic dominance and demonstrate the great power of revolution. It is true that both tourists and local people would be attracted to Tiananmen Square during national days and other special events to celebrate the birth of the nation or other special days. However, such a narrative is somewhat sarcastic considering the major incidents happened at the spot after 1949. The building itself does not belong to the collective, but to a collective. According to the research conducted by Hofstede, a famous cultural psychologist, Chinese people scored 80, an astonishingly high score on one dimension of culture, the power distance, while only scored 20 on individualism, revealing that their perceptions on the relationship between people's power and the status of individuals within a society. It is expected and accepted that social inequality exists among Chinese people, and the perception of subordinate superior relationship, deep rooted in the social hierarchy since ancient time, is reflected through the city's design. I highly doubt that the table was really turned in modern China, as the central architectural pieces still pervade the idea of centralized power and personality cult, demonstrating the controlling power of the ruling party. If that is the case, then is it fair to say that what we create for ourselves in turn strengthens the perception of people in contact with it? It seems like another chicken and egg dilemma, and it also suggests that a reciprocal relationship might exist. That is, the creations we craft both reflect and reconstruct our consciousness, and how do we interpret things in relations with each other. As a result of serving as a trade center and transportation hub since ancient time, the mingling of ethnic groups was everlasting and prominent throughout the history of Beijing. Although under the rule of Yuan and Qing, the mingling between Mongolian ethnic group and Han ethnic group, as well as the mixing between Manchu and Hangul, was restricted by royalty to keep the purity of the ruling class. The actual intermarriage and cultural interaction becomes a powerful and irreversible trend after the end of their domination. In the recent years particularly, propelled by the resettlement projects carried out by Beijing city government, many minority ethnic groups moved out from their traditional residential places like hutong or suburban gatherings and moved into modern residential lands that are closer to city center. As a result of urbanization, the geographical segregation between ethnic groups was broken, and the gathering area with high concentration of minority ethnic groups began to decrease. Following with the prominence of hybridization groups and increased ethnic diversity, although the absolute population of minority ethnic groups shows a steady increase throughout Beijing's development. The moving out from suburban residential land to city communities generates new gatherings from minority ethnic groups, 10 of which have minority ethnic population of over 20% to 49%. Among all the minor ethnicities in Beijing, the Hui ethnicity, the cultural group with Islamic cultural origin, has the greatest population of over 0.2 million, and 23% of them currently resides in the New Street area and its surroundings, reflected by the largest mosque in the area. As a religious cultural group, every Hui gathering has a mosque at its center, making them identifiable on maps by spotting mosques. The major resettlement plans that initiated after the foundation of People's Republic of China, along with the construction of Tiananmen and its peripheral building groups, the removal of ancient Beijing's wall, the construction of the ring roads and the subway system, shapes the modern appearances of the city of Beijing, while also presenting its people the juxtaposition between the modern urban lifestyle and traditional cultural practices, and changing people's perception towards the world and themselves. It further reveals the social inequality exists in a city regarding various resources for personal survival and development. Although many phenomena are common among developing cities, an essential question remains for Beijing. How is the perception of the mass changed by the city's development from following established traditions to exploring new practices and knowledge? The series of resettlement plan, known by Beijingers as Chaiqian in Chinese, literally meaning the pull down of the old houses and relocate the residents, contributes greatly to the appearance of today's Beijing. It is fair to say that these projects represent the urbanization that Beijing went through after 1949. Parallels with the formation and cleaning of certain hutongs, many Beijingers' lifestyle were completely changed. The first major resettlement plan after 1949 was the construction of the Great Hall of the People and other 9 buildings that were supposed to be finished before the 10th anniversary of the foundation of China. Today, they still exist as famous cultural, tourism, and political landmarks of Beijing, including the China's National Museum, the Beijing Railroad Station, the Cultural Palace of Nationalities, Diaoyutai State Guest House, Beijing Workers' Stadium, the Military Museum, the Agricultural Museum, the National Hotel, and the Prime Hotel. The Great Hall of People now hosts political and foreign events, as well as the conferences of the National People's Congress of People's Republic of China, the highest national power institution. The design of the hall was grandiose, which took up 0.5 million square meters in total. In order to ensure its successful construction, the city's government relocated a whole street which were known as the Sifabu Street, literally meaning the Street of Jurisdiction Department, and previous to the relocation, it was the location for Chinese jurisdictive institutions. Its current name is the West Road of the Tiananmen Square, with the Great Hall of the People on its west side and the Chairman Mao's Memorial Hall and the Monument for People's Heroes on its east side. For the relocation of the street alone, 67 institutions and 684 households were removed, making the total number of removed houses including both residential and administrative ones, reached nearly 4,000. The Ganjiakou community, one of the first modern residential areas in Beijing, was built for the resettlement of the residents living near the main street and other residents that need to be relocated as a result of the series of construction program before the 10th anniversary of the nation's foundation, as 21,000 households were in need of relocation in total during the construction of these architects. The Sifabu Street used to have the first generation of Beijing's public transportation, the tram, passing through, and it was the time when the city's population was less than 2 million. Even the road appears to be relatively empty compared to today, making the overcrowded scenes in today's subway stations impossible to imagine. Along with the process of urbanization, the creation of new and grandiose buildings not only created new cultural buildings for the city, but also creating new lifestyle for people by causing psychological shockings and physical relocation to modern living units, leading to loss of traditional cultural practices and established social networks, which are important components of shared knowledge. If the central axis line is the spinal cord of the city, then Beijing's arteries are its ring roads and public transportation system. From the completion of the second ring in 1992, it merely took 11 years for the city to witness the completion of the third, the fourth, and the fifth ring. Their connection with the central axis line, the Chang'an Street, and other vertical and horizontal major traffic roads greatly increased the connectivity between different points of the city. The low accessibility of remote points is no longer causing friction and distance for the city's residents, since the ring roads greatly reduce the time taken between any two points far away from each other in the city before. However, the large-scale increase in the connectivity between places is promoted by the development of Beijing's subway system. Since the Line 1 was put in operation in 1971, this huge underground subway system now consists of 22 interdependent lines with 608 kilometers covered in total. It is one of the world's largest and most complicated public transportation systems. More than 8.2 million people on average will take the subway during the day. The operation of the subway system significantly expands the radius of people's daily activity, as many people, especially the working class, consider subway as their top choice of transportation. It seems that the development of public transportation system and modern living units have made the spatial distance between people closer, creating a more condensed society. However, it is doubtful whether the de facto distance between people is decreased at all, as the Chinese society seems to grow towards greater degree of individualism. Psychological distance between people started to be widened, parallels with the development of smaller households and greater concentration of population. Has the city been making places more accessible and connected to people and bringing them together to highly concentrated working and living units, in effect towards a society apart? How does it influence people's cognition and their knowledge about themselves and the world around them? In addition to the mass-scale resettlement projects, the renovation and regulations of the traditional hutongs also changed the cultural and social ecology of Beijing significantly, revealing the effects of urbanization on people's ways of living and knowing. As the old social bonds and cultural practices no longer exist, and the old ways of living were threatened and challenged under the modern living standards. Hutongs, as traditional residential units that can be dated back to the Yuan dynasty, was constructed in the shape of the chessboard, reflecting ancient Confucian thoughts on the formation of the city. Such conformation of residential area reflects Beijingers' tendency to follow established traditions and reluctance to break rules that may cause agitation. In addition, the residents in hutongs live in close ties with each other, as many public spaces were shared for daily activities. For example, People tend to gather around under the trees to chat, relax, and play chess during the summer. The overlapping of living areas, although may cause unavoidable conflicts sometimes, teaches Beijingers how to get along with each other and form close ties. When I was young, my neighbors in Hutong treated me as I was one of their own kids, and they often invited me to dinner and looked after me when my parents were away for work. This works the same way with my friends too. The level of intimacy and closeness in Hutong sometimes even blur the line between households, making many people forming unbreakable bonds. During the 1940s, when the development of Beijing's Hutongs reached its climax, there were over 3,200 Hutongs with residents in the downtown and peripheral urban area. People who grew up in Hutongs or worked as salesmen in the old Beijing were called Chuans, literally implying that they wander around in the complex web of the Hutongs and crossing over in front of people's houses. What is noteworthy is that the salesmen who would wander among the Hutongs were prevalent and substituting the function of a market. It shows how relaxing the life in Hutongs was and how much people liked to socialize with each other. The life back in Hutongs, as the elders in my family often recall, were full of humane and heartwarming emotions, and free from worrying for safety. From these interactions, Beijing people learned how to have and remain a harmonious relationship with people around them, and share the limited resources they collectively owned. Perception influenced by the very structure of Hutongs. Unfortunately, the place where I used to live was included in the resettlement plan of 2015 and relocated that year, as I found modern apartments were built above the site the last time I revisited there. Many Hutongs suffered from a similar fate, and now the government had to establish preservation areas for specific Hutongs with high historical and cultural values, such as the South Luogu Alley, the Shijia Hutong. However, there are only about 20 Hutongs being included in such preservation plan, while others were left out to face their uncertain destiny. Most Hutongs are now the residential area for low-income residents or immigrants, making them vulnerable to various problems brought by poverty. For infrastructure, especially the facilities in the public space like toilets, drainage system, and markets. In addition, as people begin to own and use more private cars than as transportation, Hutongs became overcrowded and undesirable for commute. Suffering from poor sanitation and aging of many electrical facilities, the risk of having accidents and fires were high in the Hutongs. These problems made most of the Hutongs undesirable places for many modern residents, typically those with higher incomes, and making its relocation an irreversible trend. As today many people move into modern apartments for medium or high income residents, either through resettle programs or private purchase, they do enjoy a higher level of living standards and more privacy. However, they still suffer from problems created by overly high population density. The largest apartment area built for middle working class, known as Tiantongyuan, which is consisted of several communities that together occupies the land as large as 3 times the area of the Forbidden City, was located far away from the urban center, and it typically takes people over an hour to commute every day to city center for work by Subway Line 5, one of the most crowded routes of Beijing subway lines. However, for its relatively lower housing price, around 0.3 million people choose to settle here, causing problems typical to overcrowding. In addition, the increasingly segregated form of households drives a culture towards greater individuality. In modern apartments or close-gated communities, old cultural practices and social activities were nearly impossible. Especially among young peoples, it was hard to witness. Today, there are still several Hutongs that one can see the images of the old times, where people still keep the traditional lifestyle and interpersonal relationships. In the Shijia Hutong, there is a museum that tells the origin, development, and status quo of Beijing's hutongs, which opens to the public for free. As all the developing cities and countries are experiencing, social inequality is a problem of significance in today's Beijing. As people of different socioeconomic levels interact within the city at various locations, juxtaposition and conflicts appear, as reflected in the spatial arrangement of many buildings in central urban areas. Examining the arrangement of different residential areas in Beijing, one is able to find that the downtown area, the low-income residential area, typically the hutongs, and the central business district and other business and financial centers were put right next to each other. Along the main streets and roads, business flourished and the modern buildings stood next to each other, demonstrating a scene of economic prosperity and human development. However, if one turns into the hutongs and small alleys on both sides of the road, he or she will witness a different scene. Logu Alley and the Baxi area is the most commercialized hutong area for tourism and entertainment. The place is frequently flooded by streams of both local and outside tourists. It was known as the place with the strongest living atmosphere of all Beijing, and many local artists and musicians searched for sources of inspiration during their residence. While the over-commercialization brought economic prosperity to the area, making it a gathering place for many shops, restaurants, and bars. However, the prosperity at the surface cannot hide the reality of life for many beneath it. As the low-income population coexists with tourists and the higher-income groups, they in turn became the undesired populations, ignoring that their living conditions were disrupted by the trash, noise, and safety issues brought by the tourists, and people seek for entertainment there. Such social inequality, however, is tolerated as a common phenomenon and a normal part of life by Beijing people, since they see such juxtaposition every day and live within it as an integrated part of it. The future of Beijing, especially the preservation of traditional cultural practices, remain a mystery. Recent outward migration of the immigrant population and the so-called low-end population created a large scale of civil dissatisfaction, yet had little impact on the execution of Beijing's reformation plans. According to the development agenda for future Beijing, the city's government will relocate to Tongzhou, an administrative district now not considered as the traditional central urban region. What effects will it have on the city center, especially the regions with high concentration of hutongs? Will it suffer from the same misfortune of many Western cities after the city's government moved out of the downtown area, becoming overwhelmed by poverty, abandoned buildings, and unemployed and aged residents? Considering the goal of Beijing's development focuses on the concept of green and eco-friendly city, the vista for traditional hutongs and its related cultural practices seems less promising. In addition, the unification of Beijing, Tianjin, and their surrounding regions in Hebei province to form a larger city groups may likely to shift the center of development to the peripheral regions of Beijing. Perhaps in the near future, one can only learn about hutongs and the traditional cultural practices in certain museums, just as how we learn about the vanished civilizations like the Mayans, the Incas, and the ancient Babylonians. At modern times, the cities are expanding with a visible speed. From the perspective of the development of civilizations, it is promising to witness the increase in human productivity and ability to create upon and interact with the natural landscape in which we live. As human creations, these giant urban machines typically have multiple functions to serve, such as propagandas for political ideology, places enabling cultural interactions, and a material reflection of social hierarchy. Being influenced by the people residing and working inside, cities are also vulnerable to the influence of neighboring large cities at the same time. However, they were also given life through human interaction throughout its development, and as it grows towards maturity, It becomes influential to residentials' conscious and unconscious acquiring of knowledge about the world, about others, and about themselves. In general sense, it is possible to say that a city creates a shared knowledge unique to its local and immigrated residents, a collective consciousness. People's worldviews, values, and beliefs are shaped by common objects of the city and the way of living unique to a city as a result of its spatial arrangement and functions served. It is also true on personal level, as individuals usually find themselves of less significance in front of the overwhelming architects and population size of modern metropolis. Consequently, cities are more than the place we create for residence, production, and interaction. They are the reflection of our knowledge about the world. Yet it in turn shapes our personal knowledge, especially how we identify ourselves in relation to others, how we view social issues, and even what type of personality we will form. The culture of a city or regions of a city even promotes the formation of a collective personality, a source of shared knowledge for people residing in such a region. This reciprocal relationship between the source of our knowledge and what we create by using our knowledge often brings me to contemplate the existence of so-called absolute truth and meanings. If we learn and perceive through what we create, and we create as a result of our learning and perception, is there really an objective form of knowledge or truth that exists independently from our observation and interpretation? Some say that there is no fate but what we make, which sounds uplifting and enhances our senses of control and personal agency. But what if it is that there is no meaning but what we make? How does it feel? Where will it lead us to?